Welcome to Straight Talk Vermont with Linda Joy Sullivan. And I'm very pleased to have with us our featured guest, Hayden Dublois from the Foundation for Government Accountability. He is the Data and Analytics Director, and Hayden comes with far more qualifications than just the job he holds now, which is a very important position. And so, Hayden, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Linda Joy. Great to be here.
Oh, it's great to see you again. I kind of miss having you, more. We need to have you around more. So, before we get started, I'd love it if you would please tell our listeners who are all over what it is that got you started. I know you worked for Governor Scott for a while, so I know you've done some other things in Vermont. So, give us a little bit of your background and how you ended up at the Foundation for Government Accountability.
Sure. So I grew up right in, near, we had our neck of the woods right in the same part of Vermont, southern Vermont. Grew up in Manchester and went to school down there, really had a passion for politics at a young age. And that was really spurred even further when I went to Middlebury College, where one of my mentors was former Governor Jim Douglas, who's now a teacher at Middlebury. And he really got me interested in state and local politics in Vermont and helped foster a lot of great connections with policymakers on both sides of the aisle. And so in college, I spent some time as a research assistant for him, interning in then Lieutenant Governor Phil Scott's office and helping out on some campaigns here and there in the summer. And then ultimately, once I graduated, I went to work right in Governor Scott's office, first in constituent services and then ultimately managing his constituent services office and serving as a policy analyst. And so that was a great experience for several years. I still maintained close friendships with a lot of those folks on that team. And since that time, about 6 years ago, I relocated down here to Florida, which is where I'm calling in from. And I work for a remote political think tank called the Foundation for Government Accountability. And we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we work on federal and state policy in about 35 different states on a number of different issue areas, from healthcare reform to workforce development to welfare reform, taxation, all sorts of different issues. And so that's really been my focus for the last 5 or 6 years. And it's really been great to branch out. Still do a little bit of work in Vermont, which is very exciting. It keeps me connected with my home roots, but also get to do a lot of other important work across the country. So it's been really rewarding.
Wow. So that is really a very fertile background. And, I know that you also, when you went to college, I know that you got your master's, you have a degree in economics. So you're not coming to us as somebody who's not really qualified. Plus, you have the experience as well to go with this. And that's why I'm excited to have you on the show. The Foundation for Government Accountability. Can you tell me just a little bit more? So you said that you touch base in Vermont, you touch base in other states. I know you've testified before Congress.
Yep.
Can you tell us how you got involved in that part?
Sure. So I'll give you a little bit of my role, but also what the organization does more broadly. And funnily enough, there's some Vermont connections here as well, because we have some former legislators who have served on our board, Vermont legislators, which is great. So it's always a small world, and you quickly realize that in politics wherever you are. But we're, as I mentioned, we're fully remote. We're a nonprofit, and what we do is we really help push what are, from our perspective, good ideas from the foundation phase all the way into becoming law. And so what that looks like, and my team is really involved in the earlier aspects of it, is gathering data to make informed decisions and then analyzing that data. And this can be data from different government entities. It can be data from other reputable think tanks, data from private sector organizations. We'll analyze it with econometric tools and modeling software and use that to sort of form the basis of our research products, which we publish and help get in the hands of lawmakers, and use that to pitch different reform ideas that our goal is to help make them into law. And so then we'll work with the lawmakers to craft model legislation, to help with testimony, to help with one-pagers and polling, and then ultimately see the bill all the way through the legislative process at both the federal and state level. And so I play in a couple different aspects of that where I do a lot of work on the data side. And so I'm behind the computer screen quite a bit, but then I also get pulled in to help with some high stakes meetings at the federal and state level. As you mentioned, I've testified before both chambers of Congress. I've testified in legislative committees from Wyoming all the way to Vermont and many places in between. I write a lot of public facing op-eds and research. And so that's another exciting thing about what I do is I kind of get to have my hands in a lot of different buckets, and every day is a little bit different, which I really, really enjoy that aspect of it.
So can we talk, and you can kind of direct it in a different, way if you like, because I really want to know what, yes, let's talk a little bit about Vermont. So we
Sure.
know that there's been a lot of publicity on what's going on with SNAP and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about SNAP and your entity, if they're involved, not, or your own involvement or your thoughts?
Sure. So the SNAP program, and SNAP stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and it's formerly known as the Food Stamp Program. SNAP's gotten a lot of attention this year for a lot of different reasons. The most recent being the government shutdown led to a pause in SNAP benefits for the month of November. I know that was disruptive for a lot of people, especially folks who are truly needy, and it created some uncertainty for federal and state lawmakers, which is why hopefully we don't have many of these shutdowns going forward, but they happen from time to time, as we all know. But it also has gotten attention for other reasons. What folks might know as the Big Beautiful Bill, which was sort of this budget reconciliation bill that was passed over the summer, it made some pretty sizable changes to the SNAP program. What it did was, first, it strengthened the existing work requirements in the program. So the SNAP program for able-bodied adults has had work requirements historically, and they simply say, if you're able-bodied and either have no children or young children, you should work, train, volunteer, receive an education on a part-time basis. And so it broadened the nature of those requirements a little bit by extending it to parents of teenage children, increasing the upper age from 54 to 64-year-olds, and cracking down a little bit on states to waive work requirements geographically. But the other big thing the bill did, and this is really important for states like Vermont, is it told states that this historically federally financed program was now going to be a federal state share program, like other welfare programs like Medicaid are. But the kicker is it's not a fixed state share. The state share is contingent upon a state's food stamp error rate. So what that means is the more improper payments a state makes in its SNAP program, the higher the share the state will have to assume the financial responsibility for. A state like Vermont today, because Vermont's error rate is so low, thankfully it doesn't have to assume any state costs for the benefit administration. 100% of that is borne by the federal government. But once that error rate starts to creep up, if it does, and as it has in other states, the state will gradually assume a greater portion of the expenses. And so that's got a lot of state policymakers around the country thinking of ways that they can right-size benefits, take care of program integrity, because 1 in every $10 spent on SNAP in this country is spent improperly, and tackle other issues to right-size the program. The
I have a
last,
question on that, and then I don't mean to interrupt you, but I really, so regarding the accountability or the finding of the error rate, who
yes.
actually looked at that? Was it the auditors, the various state auditors, or was it your organization, or how did you find out the error rates?
Great question. So the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which oversees the program, every year does something called the SNAP quality control process. And what they'll do is they'll take a random sample, much like an audit, and they have internal auditors, and they'll take about 50,000 SNAP cases and distribute them across the country. And they'll look at 50,000 instances and review, was this person's eligibility determined properly or improperly? Were the expenditures associated with this household legitimate? Were they spent on appropriate purchases and at approved vendors? Was this individual's eligibility reviewed at the proper cadence and frequency? And then they'll make a determination as to how accurate that state was in administering benefits and making sure that they went to individuals who were truly eligible for them and on purchases that were truly intended for the program. And so that's a rigorous process that gets done once per year. And occasionally, the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, will come in and also review the integrity of the SNAP QC process. So you kind of have auditors auditing the auditors too. And so
Which
there's a
you
lot.
should have the oversight.
Yes, you
That's right.
absolutely should. Yep. So it's a really rigorous process done in a governmental fashion that's been done for years now, and those are published online for anyone to see. If you type in SNAP error rates in Google, you can find them. And there are some reports that also dive down and look at, okay, not just what are these improper payment rates, but what's driving them. What are the cause of them? Is this agencies making mistakes? Is it individuals making mistakes or being dishonest on their application forms? And turns out it's kind of all of the above. You have individuals having information on their applications that's not accurate, or it might be accurate at the time they apply, but then they experience a change in income or a change in their household composition that makes them ineligible, and no one checks that. And so they become ineligible and no one removes them from the program. And so this is becoming a really big challenge. And it's one of the reasons my organization has really been involved in trying to address this, because the way we look at it is every dollar on SNAP that goes towards someone who's not eligible for the program is a dollar that isn't being preserved for the truly needy, either a child in poverty or a senior or someone who's disabled and in need of nutrition assistance. And so our goal is to make sure that those dollars are really being spent on those vulnerable populations and not being lost in the ether of SNAP benefit trafficking or retailer fraud or improper payments.
Very important point you just brought up that I'm really interested in, SNAP benefit trafficking. Do you want to explain that a little bit further so our listeners understand what that really means?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways SNAP fraud can manifest itself. And one of those ways is people will traffic benefits and engage in retailer fraud schemes with retailers. They'll also do things like they'll sell their EBT cards for cash at a discounted rate. And so someone will say, "Hey, I've got $100 preloaded on my EBT card. I'll give that to you if you give me $80 cash," and they'll make that trade. And now you have an EBT card who was designed for this truly needy individual going to someone else, and they're getting cash for it. And because we don't have things like photo ID on EBT cards, there's no way for the retailer to know if the individual using the card is the actual intended recipient of the program. And so you have all sorts of schemes like that playing out across the country. And it's become problematic, and we really don't even know the true scale or true nature of it because there are a lot of program integrity procedures that are haphazard and administered in a way that's not consistent across states.
And then on top of that fraud, it's almost like a pyramid scheme. On top of that fraud, you have the individual who is now receiving the cash, who
Mhm.
can go and use that cash for items that they would not be allowed to purchase using the EBT card.
Yes,
So
exactly.
so it continues on, and then they can sell that card or the benefits to that card every month to somebody else.
Yes, they get the benefits preloaded regularly, and they could resell the card, and you see that playing out. And to your point, Linda Joy, about expenditures on items that are not approved, the way this works is you can use SNAP dollars for a lot of different things. You can't use it typically for tobacco and alcohol products, but if you're in a grocery store, pretty much any grocery qualifies. But recently, that's sort of gotten a little bit more federal scrutiny and state scrutiny with the sort of whole MAHA, Make America Healthy Again movement, because there are about a dozen or so states that have now applied for and received waivers for junk food in snaps. And they're specifically targeting sugar sweetened beverages and candy products. And a couple others fit in those categories once in a while. But trying to exclude those types of purchases from being allowed in the SNAP program, which, when you think about it, the core purpose of the program is supplemental nutrition assistance program. And those foods do not have adequate or healthy nutritional value. And so it's really refocusing the program on purchases that make sense for a nutritional lifestyle, because today, sugar sweetened beverages are the number one commodity purchased with EBT cards, the single highest one. We SNAP recipients spend as much on soda and candy as they do fruits and vegetables. I mean, it's a huge challenge that states are grappling with, and so they're pursuing these waivers to refocus the program. And when you think about it, it also makes sense from a standpoint of fairness, because we do have other nutrition programs that are subsidized by the federal government, like the WIC program, which is
Mhm.
Aid for Women, Infants, and Children. And that program, they're given a much shorter list of about 15 or 20 commodities they can purchase from. It's like a grocery list. You can't buy anything off that. But with SNAP recipients, we're typically given much more leeway. And so the idea of refocusing that program on healthy, nutritious purchases is really an idea that's gained a lot of momentum and is trying to tackle this sort of what I would call crisis of chronic conditions. Because once someone goes on SNAP and they start purchasing these foods, then they go to the hospital and they get treated with Medicaid dollars, and then they're back and getting SNAP benefits. And it's sort of this vicious cycle. It's not good for the recipient, it's not good for the taxpayer, and it's not good for other recipients in the program that are making health conscious choices.
So I have two questions. This is so informative, and I thank you. One, can is there a dollar cap on SNAP, or does everybody get a different amount, or does everybody get the same amount because this is what the program is? How
Mhm.
does that work? And then my second question is, if you're getting WIC, are you still allowed to get SNAP?
So I'll answer the second question first. Yes, you can be on both programs simultaneously. WIC is really designed for a much smaller population group and really targeted to those women, infants, and children in poverty, but they can also qualify for SNAP dollars. To answer your first question, it is a different amount. So it's based on your income. The way many other welfare programs work, the more you earn, the less benefits you'll receive. But SNAP is structured in a very a unique way to avoid a what is referred to as a benefits cliff or a welfare cliff problem, where people think about
Mhm.
if someone earns too much money, they lose their benefits, and the lost benefits might be more than the income that they've gathered. But the way the SNAP formula has been constructed is really innovative, and it has a lot of off ramps. It has a lot of controls built into it, so that as an individual earns more income, the value of their SNAP dollars declines by a smaller amount. So they're always sort of staying ahead, which is a really unique feature of the SNAP program that makes its income formula work quite well, so that individuals can get ahead by going back to work and trying to achieve self sufficiency.
So you brought up the benefits cliff, and I'm very interested in that. In fact, when I was in the legislature, that was something I was really interested in. And it was always, oh, you have to deal with the benefits cliff, but then it's like, oh, it's too tough, we can't figure it out, and then move on. And well, that's been out there for many, 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 many
Mhm.
years. Okay, so it's almost like put your blinders on, say it's necessary to look at, but really don't look at it.
Right.
And so let's talk about the benefits, Cliff.
Sure.
I mean, do you, in your position, do you do any data analytics on
We've
that
done
in the different states?
we've done a lot of work on the benefits cliff. It's something we
Mhm.
focused a lot on, and a lot of our results, and this might be surprising, they differ from what some other think tanks have found, because we've driven into not just taking the benefits cliff at face value, at okay, it's a status quo reality, here's what it is. Look at what's driving it. And it turns out in certain states and in many places across the country, it's not quite what it's made out to be. And what I mean by that is there are three key things to keep in mind when thinking about the benefits cliff. The first is a benefit to a lot of these programs is that they have off ramps, as I mentioned. And so take Vermont, for example. Vermont has its cash welfare program called Reach Up. And its Reach Up program is designed for individuals in really deep poverty, families who are struggling. But once you gain a certain income, you don't just get thrown off the program. You move on to another program called Reach Ahead. And Reach Ahead is transitional assistance to help those who might have just moved off of Reach Up because their income was qualified or went above qualification levels, but the state doesn't want to just throw them out and say, you're on your own now. It wants to give them a bit of a transitional aid period and help them on that path to self sufficiency. So a lot of states have those great transitional programs baked in. The other factor is that for at least the able bodied population, what's surprising is most welfare recipients are really in very deep poverty, in the sense that they typically don't work at all. And so when you think about welfare being this sort of socioeconomic continuum where you might have people at what we call 0% FPL, that's 0% of the federal poverty level, all the way up to could be 200% of the federal poverty level for SNAP programs or 138% for Medicaid programs, people are clustered towards that 0%. Probably about 80% of recipients are within 10 percentage points of zero income. And so what that means is the fundamental problem is a lack of work, a lack of training, a lack of investing yourself in your community and being engaged. And so that's been a core focus of ours, is really getting folks back into the workforce, engaged with training and education opportunities, or even volunteering at your local food bank and meeting the work requirement through a volunteerist focused perspective. And so that's been incredibly important as well. And so those are some of the factors that I think it's important to bear in mind when we're talking about the benefits cliff. Is you've got a lot of transitional programs, you've got a lot of folks who can work but aren't, and our goal is to get them back in the workforce.
So you have brought up such great points, and I thank you for your eloquence in this and the way you're presenting, because it's so clear. And we have the residents out there, taxpayers, and rightfully so. They're saying, "Hey, cut off that benefits cliff after a year, or cut it off after 2 years, and that'll solve everything." And of course, we all know that's not accurate, but it's their heartfelt
Sure,
passion because they're paying, and you can understand it, and they may know the one, say, sour apple
sure,
that's. And so right now, and it shouldn't be that it's just a forever program. Now that we're hearing there are transitional programs in there, this is very important. But let's take Vermont.
hmm
Okay. You turn around and we want to give, say, opportunity for work,
hmm
which brings up opportunity, and also opportunity for education and experience,
hmm
which would then bring up possibly more homelessness because there's not really a lot of job opportunities in the state of Vermont where the people are located right now, say where they live, getting the benefits from this particular program, whatever program it may be. And so they are a statistic in the benefits cliff. But if you take away and you say, okay, here's a job for you, and it's on the other side of the state, you're creating a whole bunch of other factors.
yes,
Can you talk a little bit about that, about this, like, kind of, what are you going to do? Whichever
sure.
way you go, you're kind of screwed. So,
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, and there are a lot of facets to that. And that's why one of the things we focused on is sort of helping policymakers understand there are a lot of different tools out there. It's not just go find a job. And it can't be go find a job, because if you're living in, Canaan, Vermont, if you're living in, Lowell, if you're living in communities that are exceptionally rural and there aren't a lot of employers, it's not as easy as it seems. And getting a job can be an option, but it can be also one of many options. And so that's why we've encouraged states to use a program, what's known as their Employment and Training Program, ENT, which is a facet of SNAP. In Vermont, it's called ICANN, the Individual Career Advancement Network. And what it is it's a network of different engagement opportunities that SNAP recipients have to meet their work requirements or to just engage with their communities. And so working, especially to your point, if the job is halfway across the state, yeah, that might not be an option. But if they can connect you and say, hey, this local food bank or this local homeless shelter needs help as a condition of receiving your benefits, can you go help them out half time? Or we know you can't find work in your community, but we've got a great online training program to help advance your skill set. Would you participate in that part time, or go to a local community or technical college and invest in that? So there are a lot of different ways you can really engage and meet these requirements. It's also why the employment and training program reimburses for things like mileage and even childcare expenses, in part to help individuals, especially parents who have children, say, we can help you with some of your household expenses and reimbursements if you are making an effort to go out and engage with your community. And so that's another great feature of the program, is that it really tries to be accommodating to folks to help them meet the work requirement. It's not punitive, it's accommodating, and done so in a fashion that is really trying to help folks realize that path of self-sufficiency.
So I have one more question on this area, and then I'd love to jump, if you are willing, to the education
Sure.
situation going on. But my question here is, so these volunteer programs would most probably be through some type of designated agency, not for profit.
Sure.
How are they feeling about it with, if you bring in as part of a requirement that says you can go and volunteer here or do this with their own models when they have their own financial control?
Mhm.
And how do they feel about that kind of invasion into their own not-for-profit model?
Well, what's the good thing? The good thing for them is, for a lot of the nonprofit, non-governmental organizations, they can choose to be a part of this network, but they don't have to be. And so, if it's not something they're comfortable with, they don't have to participate in the SNAP ENT program. But those that have chosen to do so means they want to be that resource. They want to be that opportunity to help someone escape from the generational cycle of dependency and realize their self-worth. And so I think a lot of different providers have realized not only can we make a difference by giving back to our communities in the form of aid, but we can also be that opportunity for those very same individuals if they want to, acquire a skill set, or if they want to participate in giving back and just help stock the shelves at their local food pantry. And that's a really profound way folks can realize their own self-worth, is they can go from being someone who might be feeling down on themselves and feeling, why do I have to remain stuck here, and continuing to go back to the food pantry, and then they can eventually become the individual helping hand out those meals. And I have a great a friend, a guy named James Whitford, who runs a charity in Missouri called Watered Gardens, and he really focuses in on this. He has what's called a worth shop, where individuals who have been experiencing poverty, he helps them realize their potential by helping them find a skill set that works for them in their worth shop, and actually build things or engage in crafts or engage in volunteering opportunities for their community that helps them feel so much better about themselves. Because a lot of these folks who are receiving SNAP benefits, it's not just a physical thing. It's also a emotional, psychological, mental issue of feeling down and trapped and stuck in your life, and you really can't see a light at the end of the tunnel. And so he realizes there's so much power in that work and so much potential in every person. And so he's sort of taken that concept and supercharged it. And I think the more providers, the more policymakers can realize the impact of that model, the better.
Have you found, I said it was only one question, but now I have another one.
Okay.
Have you found that those transitioning out of incarceration who may go on to the SNAP programs are actually are able to participate in these volunteer not-for-profit programs, or have you not even researched
That's
any
a
of that?
great question. And so I'm going to draw it to a reform we worked on for many years, in which we actually don't work on as much because a lot of states have done such a good job on it, is what's called Fresh Start. And so the idea is to make the transition out of incarceration as seamless as possible, because it is so easy for those folks to fall back into the same traps that got them stuck in the criminal justice system in the first place. And so if they're facing punitive measures, even put aside volunteering for a moment, even just getting a job, if they
Mhm.
have occupational licensing restrictions that are really punitive on them, and they can't go engage in a trade that they might be naturally predisposed to because their occupation has regulatory barriers associated with it, that's unfair. And so we worked with organizations like the ACLU to try to break down those barriers and say there can't be arbitrary or vague language in states' codes of occupational licensing that excludes people for really arbitrary reasons and gives all this latitude to licensing boards to turn down occupants. If you want to turn someone down because of a past conviction, the conviction should be related to the underlying occupation that they're applying for. So you wouldn't want someone in a trade if their conviction is related to being a scam artist in that trade in the past. That probably wouldn't be a good idea. But if it has nothing to do with that, and they're
I saw that movie.
yeah, right. If they're legitimately trying to make a fresh start of it, they should be encouraged and fostered to do so. And we should give them predictability in the licensure process. Same thing with volunteer organizations. They should be given the opportunity to give back and make a meaningful difference and not be penalized or looked down upon for past offenses that they're trying to make right.
Wow, this is great. Can you tell us, Hayden, please, a little bit about what you see as the educational dilemma and what's going on right now in Vermont?
Yeah. What an interesting time and a lot of interesting conversation about education and education finance in Vermont. And so my perspective on it is a little bit interesting because I grew up in Vermont. I grew up in an area, as you know, that was hit pretty hard with property taxes following Act 60 and Act 68, Manchester, Dorset, that whole area.
Mhm.
And now I live outside Vermont. And so it's a little bit of an outside looking in perspective. And Vermont's education financing system is very different from a lot of other states, and its education realities are very different. Over the last 20, 30 years, it's lost tens of thousands of students from its K through 12 population, and yet the infrastructure backing that has kind of remained pretty similar. Vermont still has way more school districts and schools per capita than a lot of other states do of comparable size and rural nature. You look at Wyoming, which has a smaller population, has less than half the same number of school districts that Vermont does. And it's a significantly larger geographic area with more geographic disbursement as well.
Does Wyoming have the, say, transportation barriers that Vermont has?
Some of them, yes. Some of them, no. So it's also a mountainous state. And so you deal with a lot
Mhm.
of scenarios like you have in Vermont where you might have a school that's literally over the other side of a mountain. And so that's a reality. And it has more isolated pockets in the same way Vermont does, but some of them might not be as acutely felt as Vermont. And
Mhm.
so Vermont's rural nature definitely plays a role. And there are some rural schools that are going to be essential for that reality. But then there's also this if we've been doing the same thing over and over and over again and we're getting results that aren't trending in a direction that's positive, isn't that a little bit of the definition of insanity? And so over the
Right.
last several years, Vermont's national education scores have started to creep down. And so you've got education quality that's a little bit haphazard. You've got stark disparities in education opportunities. I was very blessed to grow up in a part of Vermont, Manchester, where we had a great independent school, Burnburton Academy, that a lot of kids went to, and that really had tremendous not only academic programs but music and sports and extracurriculars. But uh, if you're in Worcester or if you're in Bridgewater, you might not have those same opportunities, and it speaks to a
Right.
certain level of fairness. And backing it all is this property tax structure where Vermonters are paying more and more every year to educate fewer kids with an education system that is at best stagnant in the quality of outcomes it's producing. And so lawmakers have been confronted with this problem. And I think for a while, there was a little bit of burying heads in the sand by some. I think the couple years in a row of double-digit property tax increases, and then the election outcomes last year that sparked some pretty big change in the legislature were a little bit of a wake-up call. And so that's why you saw the passage of this bipartisan Act 72 this past year that really started to change this in a couple big ways. Two of the really big ones were changing the funding formula, which is the way education finance works in Vermont. And it works totally different in Vermont than in other states because in Vermont, the decisions of spending in Chittenden County can affect the decisions of voters in Orleans County just because of the way the funding formula has this statewide component. Compare that to Florida, where 100%, almost 100% of our education spending and revenue decisions are made locally. So I live in Collier County, Florida. What we raise in revenue is what we spend on education. We're not influencing folks in Miami in that fashion. And so it's very different. And Vermont tried to tweak that in a way that really rewards towns that invest in education, but up to a point where it doesn't become an excessive runaway cost problem. The other thing it did was create this redistricting task force or school
Oh,
consolidation
yeah,
task.
let's talk about that.
Yeah, and so they were charged with presenting some maps to the legislature as to what could some school districts look like in a consolidated fashion. And so they've been working at that for several months now, and they recently came into some hot water because the recommendation was we actually don't want to have consolidation. We don't think it works. So we're proposing this idea of voluntary incentives rather than consolidation. And so the governor, in my opinion, rightly pointed out, hey, that's not what you were tasked to do. And that's probably going to just keep kicking down the problem even further down the road because the legislature really needs solutions. It doesn't need more, well, we can make this voluntary. No, listen, that's continuing the failed policies of the past. We've got to have a fresh look at this with some real maps that make a
Can I
difference.
Yeah. Can I jump in on that?
Please,
Because I have a very strong opinion on
sure.
who makes up this task force, and I will not bring it out yet. But it's built with legislators.
Mm-hmm.
And I have okay, I'm going to bring it out. I have a serious problem with that.
Yep.
So, hi, we're going to do what we want here. Yeah, legislators belong in the legislature. That's where they belong,
Yep.
in my opinion. They do not belong on these task forces. They do not belong there. Business people, education experts, okay, and I don't just mean a teacher,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I mean, the really high qualified people to make such a monumental change
Mm-hmm.
is who should be on this task force.
Mm-hmm.
So letting that opinion now that you've heard that I was not going to bring out, um, how did that, in your opinion, affect this decision of let's not commit?
Hugely. You hit the nail on the head, Linda Joy, because when you create when there's a legislative body that exists, the Vermont legislature, and a task force or a committee or a commission gets created, and that's staffed with or governed by legislators, then you've essentially got the legislature or a portion of it making recommendations to itself, which is a huge problem in my opinion. You don't want that.
Yeah.
The idea of a committee is to get outside expert advice, as you mentioned, not to be advising yourself. Because if the legislature could have relied on its own judgment to fix this, I would think they would have done so already without needing an independent outside body. The idea should be to get those outside experts, whether they be a teacher, uh, involved in a school union or a school board or business or higher education, whatever it might be, bring together all those stakeholders. But the minute you have legislators starting to provide advice to themselves, that really muddies the process. And if you read some of the news coverage and minutes of the meetings, I'm not going to name names, but you can see certain legislators
Right.
sort of driving the conversation. And it's folks who've been involved in this for a while and haven't helped solve the problem to date. And I don't have the confidence they're going to fix it. And so the governor is naturally, I think, frustrated with that reality and facing sort of a board that I don't want to say was sabotaged from the beginning, but that was put in a position or created with an outcome in mind. And that outcome was let's not tie our own hands. And that's really a bad way to go about making public policy. It should be those independent experts that you mentioned that should be advising the legislature impartially and giving their expert advice. And then the legislature should be considering that and making input. The end product that has been given to the legislature by a committee staffed of, among others, legislators, has now given them the excuse to say, oh, see, even that independent body says we don't have to do this a certain way. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Those are your people. They're the people you appointed that make up the membership of your own General Assembly. Isn't there a problem with that? And I have a big problem with it. And I think a lot of Vermonters do too. And so that's why the governor has floated the possibility of the members who made some of those decisions being replaced. And I think that's a fair criticism to levy against this body. In my mind, many of them abdicated their duty, and Vermonters deserve the ability to have real maps, real options presented to their elected officials for those elected officials to consider, not something to kick down the road and say, yeah, we'll look at some voluntary incentives down the way. if you remember, that's sort of what happened with Act 46 was
Yes, I do remember.
very, very
I
controversial.
think I wrote an article on
You
that.
probably did. And what we had was we had this bill that had some cost containment in it, and then it had sort of, well, let's look at governance mergers. And those governance mergers were, again, it was incentives. And it wound up costing taxpayers some money. And what they did in the second year of the bill was they came back and they struck out all the cost containment. And so all you had then was incentives to merge. And those incentives wound up costing more than probably the bill saved. And so it was kind of this mess of a situation. And we're setting up for a similar cycle. I mean, Vermonters can't afford double-digit property tax increases year after year, and the governor gets that. I think a lot of legislators do, but they also can't. Kids don't deserve stagnant outcomes or disparate outcomes where you have Barton and Burlington and Bennington offering completely different sets of quality education to their students. Something's got to be done, and I think this task force had an opportunity to do it the right way. It's, I think, unfortunate that we're seeing a trend in the other direction, and I hope that changes.
Right. I hope so too. I just don't have the confidence that it will. Because, I mean, in my mind, once you put legislators on this type of a task force, okay, you don't know if they're coming in with the mindset of, okay, this is where we're going to go and make sure it doesn't happen, because then we vote on it again and we get to bring our own maps out, because that's part of
Yep.
the program, part of the bill as well,
Yep.
that goes back to the legislature and they get to do what they want again.
Right.
And so it's almost like a forced handicap. And I have grave concerns about that.
Yeah.
And we know I would be almost the independent swing vote on everything in the
Yeah.
House when I was in there. And this one I have a major problem with.
Again.
It's almost like the Ethics Commission that doesn't exist anymore.
Yes.
Like, let's throw that away
Right.
because it doesn't work for us. And so this is really is problematic. I'm not so sure that even the governor's requests to have people replaced, it's just he's lost so much time on this, and this,
Yeah.
I mean, so it's done. I mean, it's not going to happen anymore. It's, we're going round a couple of years down the road again.
Yeah.
Which is almost the typical, this is what we do. They did it with the climate bills, like if you don't vote for this bill, it won't rain anymore, kind of thing. And so, I mean, and that's what I'm hearing here.
Yeah.
I do believe that there were people who were earnest.
Oh, yes.
On the task force. So I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is the mix was a totally inappropriate mix in my mind.
Totally agree with you. Completely agree. And I think the variable that you just kicked in on that everyone keeps forgetting to talk about is time. Time is a huge reality. You've got the task force complaining, "Oh, we've only had 4 months." In my mind, you've only had 4 months. I mean, first of all, Representative Patty McCoy, the House Minority Leader, mentioned, I think last session, there have been something like 36, 37 studies on education finance in Vermont since the year 2000. There's a whole repertoire of material out there to draw from, and it's been studied to death. And now we've got another task force saying, "Oh, we've only got 4 months." A lot can be done in 4 months if you don't come into it with a predetermined outcome, which I think many of them did, and then force the board to sort of go along with that. But to your point,
and if you actually say, I've been assigned to this task force and I only have 4 months, then I better be there every day. Or don't take that position.
I'm going to buckle down and make this my full-time thing for the next 4 months is the reality. And now, to your point, okay, we're on the back end of that. It's November 24th today as we're recording this, which means in a week, the infamous December 1 letter will come out from the tax commissioner, which projects what the average statewide property tax increase is going to look like. I have no idea what that's going to look like. If past trends continue, probably won't look all that pretty, is my guess. And then you've got the legislature convening in about 5-6 weeks. And so we're running out of runway here. If I were the legislature, this is it. I mean, this is going to be the pinnacle session. It has to be for this to get addressed in some fashion, because if they don't, the consequences are simply unaffordable, unfair, and unsustainable in the long run for Vermonters, for taxpayers, for students, for educators. This can't go on anymore. And so the legislature cannot take the attitude that it has taken in past years. The time isn't there anymore. We're out of it. And the appetite, the patience of Vermonters has run out on this issue, in my estimation. And again,
You're right.
I'm out looking in, but that's my assessment.
Yeah, well, you hit it too, the appetite, okay? Because Vermonters are now, it doesn't matter anymore. Everything they do out there is horrific because nothing's getting done, and it's just a political battle back and forth, and nobody really cares about
Yep.
outcomes for Vermont, and that's not healthy. That
Yep.
is not, I mean, when you are in these leadership positions, you're the messenger and you just have to do it. Bite the bullet. It's not this kumbaya. Okay. You need to get in there and you need to do the work
Yep.
and then report the findings. Not, oh, well, I had 4 months and I meet once a month or once not even once a week. I mean, right. I
Yeah.
mean, I mean, okay, I could not sincerely have taken an appointment like that, knowing that it was going to be whenever we meet to do such a voluminous job.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's why I have grave concerns. I had from the beginning. I was skeptical the minute this
Yeah.
happened.
Well, as you said, it's a grave, huge responsibility. We're talking about rethinking the way a multi-billion-dollar education system operates in the state of
That's right.
Vermont. That is not a task to be taken lightly. It's not something to be taken with a grain of salt. It is a serious endeavor that requires outside the box creative thinking. And maybe, I mean, in my opinion, the one thing they should have done more of was a little bit of looking at other states. And I'll give you a
Yes,
case study. Rob Roper just had a really interesting piece, and him and I don't agree 100% on this issue, but I thought his piece made a compelling point about how Mississippi is now exceeding Vermont in its
I read
education.
that, and I agree with you. I don't always
Yeah,
agree with Rob, but he writes, and I read everything, and
yeah.
so you're right. He hit Mississippi. So go on. I
And I'm
didn't.
like, no, it's such a great point, and he's right on so many things, and that was, I think, a reality check that a lot of Vermonters aren't getting. I'll make it as personal as this. So when I moved to Florida, and I lived in Vermont, as I mentioned, I was a renter in Vermont, but my renter would literally, every time we raised our rent, it would be, your rent is going up by X% because property taxes are going up by Y%, and so we saw it very acutely. And then I moved to Florida. Every year since I've lived in Florida, not only have my property tax rates gone down, but the rates have gone down by such an extent that it's more than offset the increase in the appraised value of my property, so that my property tax bills have gone down. Meanwhile, our education outcomes are now ahead of the national average and starting to exceed Vermont's. So this reality of we're just going to keep throwing money at the problem and hope it fixes itself is not the solution that has worked for Vermont, which has the highest per pupil spending in the nation. What that's created is really high property taxes and really great for some vested stakeholders in the system. But it turns out maybe not all that great outcomes for kids. And so there
Which
should
is
be,
the priority.
which should be the priority, and maybe some consideration of other states' models is what we need here, and what should be considered. So I hear your pessimism. I mean, I wish I had a crystal ball or a magic 8 ball to say 6 7 months from now, what's this going to look like? Are they going to
I
buy
hear the
down property?
Diggers doing an article on the local witches. So
Oh
maybe
yeah, I know. Really focusing on the important priorities there, the local witches. Meanwhile, we've got a multi-billion-dollar education system on the brink here in Vermont. I mean, it drives me crazy because you've got these core issues, and it's not just education. You've got Vermonters struggling with stark education challenge. You've got healthcare costs. I mean, Vermont is close to #1 in the nation for healthcare premiums now. You've got infrastructure issues, seen again most recently with some of the flooding in the Northeast Kingdom. And I know the governor has appealed the disaster declaration issue. I mean, you've just got so many challenging issues. The media is writing about witches, and I'm just like, what's going on? Like, I love my home state. Vermont has a special place in my heart, but it's really time to rethink some of the way things are and how we've gotten here and start thinking outside the box and more creatively. And I just hope legislators have the courage to session to do that. But to your point, maybe I should knock on wood about that comment.
I remember we're coming into election again, so it's always, you're not supposed to campaign while you're sitting in your seat, but you know that they're campaigning while they're sitting in their seat. And so this is another issue
Yeah,
that, I have also. It's like get in there and work and read the bills and participate, not just, legislative council writes a bill and it's like, well, the legislative council wrote this bill, so I'm going to advocate for it. That's how it works. Okay.
right.
They're just supposed to tell you, okay, what the constitutionality is. You're
Yeah.
supposed to write the bill. Okay. And you're
Well,
supposed to get in there and give them the elements of the bill and then question them and question them and question them to get the bill where you want so you could present it on the floor and argue it.
yeah. And what's interesting is because that actually brings up a bigger, broader point. And please veer off if you want to take it in a different direction. But I think this
No
is
go.
interesting. I've been involved in some form or fashion at different levels of intensity of the legislature in Vermont for the past decade or so. It has changed. I mean, the legislature a decade ago is not the legislature today. And I used to remember Governor Douglas telling me stories about his own experience and how the bipartisan camaraderie isn't what it once was. And I really never experienced that. But I look back now to what the legislature was when I came in, and there were a lot of just key important folks in that body, thoughtful individuals, Dick Sears, Dick
Right.
Mazza, Jane
Sure.
Kitchell. I'm thinking who on the House side, Jim Condon. You've got yourself.
Thank you.
And I mean that truly. Folks who didn't come at it from a partisan angle, who looked at it from a what is best for my constituency, what's best for the state, how can I put aside party lines to get what's done for the people I care about. And you had a lot of legislators thinking that way. And then I think it really happened around COVID. Things started to change. There was this big influx of federal money, and suddenly decisions, really weren't as consequential from a financial standpoint because we had ARPA funds raining from the sky. You had a whole flock of a lot of freshman legislators coming in at the same time those experienced voices were leaving or passed away. And it led to a sort of knowledge and institutional memory gap in the legislature that I don't think has really rectified itself. And you also saw the supermajority gain. And I think whether it's a Republican or a Democrat supermajority, too much imbalance is a problem. And you had
Agreed.
probably least balanced legislature you've ever had for a period of time. It kind of went back after the last election to more balance. Um, but all of that created a legislative environment that's very different from the bipartisan camaraderie-based spirit that I saw when I was a young intern for then Lieutenant Governor Scott, where you had people putting aside party lines and working together. That was around the time you entered the legislature. It was very different, and it's just unfortunate. It's not what it once was. You don't have those same critical people, and no one has risen, I think, fully to fill their shoes. And that's really becoming a challenge. I'm hoping that'll change over time as some of these other legislators grow in their seats. And you still do have some kernels of encouragement come from certain folks. But it's different than it was, and not in a good way. And we'll see how that pans out.
You're right. And when I went in, it was more balanced. And we lost a lot of the people who were there, the business people, and
Yep.
it morphed into a supermajority. And I am totally against a supermajority of any sort. And even though there have been more, say, seat balance changes this round, I'm not content or satisfied that just because there's a closer balance of party, that the people sitting in the seats are just not there to do a vote a party. So it's the same
Right.
problem. And
It
so
is.
unless you're really going to get in there and assess and analyze and not just do party vote, there's a problem. And
Yes.
so that I see that change way down the line. So
Totally.
yeah, I mean, I hope I'm wrong. I
Yeah.
really do. I hope I'm wrong. I think that coming in there and having you can be part of a party. That's fantastic, but you still need to have your own intelligent, independent voice and your own intelligent, independent analysis of what's
Yep.
going on so that you can, take care of your not only your local constituents, but across the state, they're all your constituents.
Totally.
And so, you really need to understand these issues, and these issues are complex. So, I want to let you talk about what you'd like to bring up right now in our last 10 minutes.
Oh man. Oh, that's exciting. Um, hmm. Why don't we let me think if there's something. Why don't we talk about an issue that I think is gaining a lot of attention and that's also really important in Vermont, which is housing.
Oh,
Sort of
please.
the way I've looked at it, there have been a couple, like 2 or 3 issues over the last few years that have gotten a lot of attention in Vermont. Education, finance, uh, crime and criminal justice, housing probably being the third one. If I had to pick a fourth that I think is starting to gain more, it's probably healthcare is gaining that sort of place as that fourth issue. But housing's an important one. I know it's one you care a lot about. It's one I care a lot about. And it's something when I worked for Governor Scott, I played a little bit in that sandbox with Act 250. And, we've sort of seen a reshaping of housing policy and housing priorities in Vermont. But I think a lot of the regulatory reform issues haven't really fully gone away. And so what we've kind of got is this, I don't want to say compromise system, but a different system, but one that isn't where it needs to be modern and keeping up with Vermont's housing needs. Because I mean, you talked a lot about earlier on when we were talking about SNAP recipients that there aren't a lot of employment opportunities. Well, one of the reasons is there aren't a lot of housing opportunities for those workers. I mean, all of these crises are interconnected. We have a workforce
Correct.
shortage, we have job shortage, we have a housing shortage, you've got a health provider shortage. I mean, everything is related. We don't have healthcare workers, so we have a healthcare shortage, and we don't have housing to house the healthcare workers because there's a construction shortage. I mean, it's incredible how they're interrelated. But the housing issue in particular is so fundamental in my mind because without housing, without an affordable stockpile of homes, it really is difficult to grow the tax base, to grow the workforce, to create employment opportunities, and to finance the critical investments that are needed in Vermont's education system, its physical infrastructure, its mental health and social services systems. And so housing has to be number one in my mind. And I think this is yet another area where Vermont could be looking to other states. And so I'll give you an example. One thing we've done here in Florida to make the process a little bit more predictable is we've created these local permitting deadlines. And I have mixed feelings about it myself some days, but the one thing it's surely done, it said that localities that don't issue permits for new homes built within or new home building applications within a certain period of time, either giving them an affirmation or a denial, every day they're delayed, the permit fee gets reduced by a certain percentage. Some states have taken even a step further and have said that if the locality is late, that the permit is automatically approved. And so that's why you see certain states like Phoenix, Arizona has become what they call, you could theoretically get a building permit within one day, which is incredible when you think about it. And you
Right.
look at that compared to the prolonged timelines in Vermont, that is complicated by not only do you have local review with planning boards and development review boards, and not only do you have state agency review through the Agency of Natural Resources and other entities, historic preservation, but you've got this other uh, sort of architecture of Act 250, which is this sort of
Right. We know how I feel about Act
yeah,
250.
this third rail no one wants to touch. And so, growing up in Manchester, this was a big issue because Manchester was one of these famous, it was a 1 acre town, as they call it. So most,
Right.
this, most towns, in order to trigger Act 250 jurisdiction, a project needs to be over 10 acres in nature if they have zoning bylaws. Manchester was a 1 acre town, so it only needed to be 1 acre or larger. And so my dad, one of the things he did was he was a commercial real estate developer. He wouldn't touch housing with a 10-foot pole because of the Act 250 complications that were created. And now some of those have gone away. But even outside of housing, it's still a problem because he tried to bring other elements of commerce into Manchester, and the amount of permit appeals that he would get, and even the person making the appeals would admit, oh yeah, I know it's frivolous, but it competes with my business, so I'm going to tie you up in court as long as I possibly can. And because the environmental court is so backed up, I know me just filing an appeal is going to keep you from hitting shovel the dirt on your project for a year. And he's like, you got to be kidding me. And so
And
you've
you're
got,
right. The manipulation of that process, the appeal process, is just flagrant
oh, it,
across the state.
it's out of control. And so until that is dealt with and acknowledged, and I would go into um, committee meetings in Montpelier. There was this commission. It was the Act 47 Commission on Vermont's Act 250 future. And I remember one representative, he's no longer in the legislature, denying that there was even a problem. And I remember he was only looking at Act 250 permits. And then I said, well, the appeals process is just as easily hijacked on the municipal permit side. And you're not looking at that. And then Ernie Pomerleau, who was a
Sure.
developer out of Burlington, a Democrat, he came in with he called it his famous spaghetti chart, which was this chart that looked like someone dropped a blob of spaghetti on a paper, and it had all the connections to all the various agencies and applicants and permitting entities that needed approval for any single project. And his point was, it is so complicated and convoluted in Vermont in a way that it isn't in so many other states, that until that regulatory issue is addressed, we're not getting anywhere. And my fear is, and again, I'll wrap up my rant in a minute here, but my fear is
No,
that
go.
we still haven't tackled the root causes of those regulatory barriers in Vermont. And until and unless those are addressed in a meaningful way, and to his credit, Governor Scott has tried hard in this area, but I think he's met with a lot of resistance. Until those are addressed, we're in deep trouble. And thankfully, I think there's starting to be a little bit of attention at the national level on this issue. And you've seen a little bit more of this. I think that's probably going to continue over the next several months. Is what can we do? And it's sad, but things like natural disasters have brought this into light. Like if you look at the wildfires in California and how
Right.
long it's taking those municipalities and counties to approve the permits for peoples whose lives were literally upended by a wildfire. I mean, that's
So sad.
creating, yeah, it's creating a focal point on an issue that deserves it. So I'm hopeful that will be addressed, but we'll see. I think there's a lot of room for progress on that.
Well, this has been great. And can I get you to commit to come back on?
I would love to come back. This has been such a joy, so I would certainly love to.
Thank you. You are such an informative speaker, and you know so much about what's going on, and you're so open and forthcoming. And the fact that it is really for the people to hear, and this is not a political show, nor is it a
Yeah,
political position. It's the facts and the data, and that's what you do. So I want to thank you, Hayden, for being with us. And I want to thank NEK-TV for always putting Straight Talk Vermont with Linda Joy Sullivan on the air. And we will see you next week.